Unfortunately, we seem to have a few technical issues with yesterday's video ranking all 33 MCU villains, and for those of you who were worried about that video being a little long, don't you worry, because this episode is going to be much shorter since we're focusing solely on the dozen villains within the entirety of the How to Train Your Dragon franchise, including the TV shows, Riders / Defenders of Berk, as well as Race to the Edge, and of course all three movies. We're not including anyone from the games, however, so that's why I'm limiting this list to just 12 villains to talk about. So naturally, I'm going to be talking about them in more depth than I did the MCU villains, but even then, with there only being 12 of them, this video, as you can tell from the length, is going to be much shorter and much more of a joy to get through. So without further ado, we're going to be ranking these villains from worst to best after the intro has played itself out. Coming in at 12th place, we have Chong Gai Khan, I believe his name is. It's a name that was never actually explicitly stated in the third movie, so if the movie can't remember he existed, then it shouldn't expect that of me either, because this character, he's not even a character, he's literally just background fodder, since, you know, he exists in a handful of scenes, but isn't given anything action-based, so there's no reason to feel threatened or intimidated by this guy. He has no personal connection to Hiccup or our other heroes in any fashion whatsoever. If they don't bring him up by name in fear of him and his dragon armies that he's mustering, and he doesn't even tie into Grimmel's motivation either. It's not like he incentivizes Grimmel to hunt down the Night Fury, because he's hunted down Toothless for the love of the hunt, and of course wanting to finish what he started by killing off every last Night Fury. So the fact that he has no sort of impact on Grimmel's plans or his motivations, and he's literally just background fodder with no character depth or any sort of, well, motivation besides rule of the world, is what makes him weak and generic as a villain. He's literally just the Asian background character, and that's all I can say about him, really. It might sound vaguely racist, and if it does, that's on the fault of the writers and not on me, because otherwise writers should have gave this character at least a little more to do, or not have included him altogether. But coming up next, we have Griselda the Grizzly, who basically has the same problems as Chong Gai Khan, but she has more chemistry with our other villains, since she has more expressive reactions to their actions. And so that naturally makes her have a little bit more of a fun on-screen presence and makes her more memorable. But once again, it's a name that you don't really remember once the credits roll, because she's not really explicitly stated by name throughout the movies. And once again, there is a huge lack of connection, and that makes her highly background fodder based more so than a character, and that makes her boring, generic, and very, very weak of a character, mind you, if you could even call her that. But moving on, we have Ragnar the Rock. He's easily the best of this trio because he has some personality to call his own. He's a brute without brain, you could say, because he plays with the little wooden ships like toys, and so that kind of child, playful nature to him is really charismatic and unique to this villain. So it's cool to see just such a playful villain, and he has a very intimidating design because he's so big and brawny, and so when he's fighting against Gobber for two brutes at one another's necks, it's slightly more intimidating because you can actually see the action unfolding before you and the consequences from that. So Ragnar the Rock, you know, whilst not possessing any sort of motivation himself, does at least have that physique to him and that playful nature to him, if nothing else. No development, no motivation outside of conquering the world, which again is generic. So he might be a weak villain, but at the very least, he's not as weak as the other two within his group of characters. But coming up next at number 9, we have Savage. Now, what I love about Savage is that he's motivated by one thing and one thing alone, himself. He has no loyalty and just wants to do bad for the sake of doing bad, even when both of his leaders have turned to the side of doing good and helping dragons and changing society. He refuses to change with them, and that's because, you know, it's the only thing he knows how to do. He only knows how to be evil, and that's it. And so that motivation and mindset behind him is layered and more intriguing than that of the other villains on the list so far. But even with that being said and done, Savage because he's just motivated by nothing but his own self-interest, it does make him far less intriguing of a villain, and because of that, he doesn't exactly have the layers that other villains have, even if it's more so than villains preceding him on this list. And really, you can't invest in his story as much as that of the other villains, because you can't really invest yourself in a character that has no loyalties, even if that does make him more dangerous. And you can't invest yourself in a character that's just motivated solely by his own presence, you could say. You find yourself rooting for villains more when they have more thought out, more in depth character arcs, and of course motivations, and Savage has none of those, which is why he's here on the list. But moving on, we have Krogan, who once again is just your generic run of the mill bad guy who leads for dragon flyers, and he's a bit of a badass, that's for sure. He's very acrobatic, and that makes him very intimidating in battle. But outside of the intimidation, this villain is so generic. In fact, because he's too busy being ruled by Tradio in the final season, we're not really given enough time to flesh out what he wants as a character, because he's too busy following in the footsteps of other people. And so because of that, a lot of that intimidation is lost, because he seems like more of a follower than a leader, and naturally that doesn't make him his own intimidating presence, because instead what you're worried about is Tradio and not him. So his lack of individuality makes him less of a character, and he has no development whatsoever. He doesn't learn from his mistakes. And so naturally he has a very anticlimactic ending, which you couldn't give a toss about, since you aren't invested in the character from when he's introduced, and you still aren't invested at the very end, because there's no arch to actually invest yourself into. It's scarce to no existent whatsoever, making him easily one of the weakest villains of a franchise. But speaking of Tradio, he's coming up next. Now, what I love about this villain is the twist reveal that he was evil all along. And when that happens, it's not predictable in the slightest. It actually takes you by surprise and makes this reveal very, very memorable. As his voice changes, it deepens and becomes so much more intimidating. So you are fearful of this character, and better yet is the dramatic irony they create with it, because of course, he's going around for market stalls with Hiccup as a double agent, and so you're fearing for the lives of him and the twins and what he'd do and how merciless he is, because he's motivated solely by money and power and will do anything it takes to get there, even at, of course, the sacrifice of our main characters that we care so dearly about. So that intimidation behind Johan, and of course his amazing chemistry with practically everyone on screen, because his voice actor has such a distinctive energy to him that brings so much life to this character. And his twist reveal, like I said, it's surprising, and it makes you look back on the seasons with a completely fresh perspective, and makes those seasons even better as you realise that, wait, Johan was a bad guy all along. Now everything makes more sense and feels more interconnected. So above all, he elevates the quality of the seasons preceding his twist reveal, but unfortunately he wasn't a villain for nearly long enough, and as a villain we aren't really given the time to be given layers for his character or development in any way, and for money motivation is highly generic. Well, for money and power, I should say, more so than anything. And ultimately, because of that, as soon as the twist reveal is over and done with, and there's no more dramatic irony behind the character, you just kind of forget his existence in the plot altogether. Especially when he's not really being brought up by our main characters. But I do love the fact that he has a effective presence on these main characters, even when he isn't on screen, due to how they react to other traders, and just how they go about things, and the impact he has in their lives because of it. That's compelling. But everything else about him is pretty generic, and we're just not nearly given enough time to invest ourselves in an arc for this villain, because there is no arc. He doesn't change, he doesn't learn from his enemy, and he's just evil for the sake of it, for the sake of gaining that money and power, which he himself sees seems as though he can only acquire it through evil acts rather than that of being heroic, like Hiccup and all that. But there isn't really a contrast between them. Johan is kind of like his own independent, separate entity. He's not in sharp contrast to Hiccup whatsoever, and that just makes him seem like a lesser villain because of it. So naturally, that's why Trader Johan ends up here. But next up on our list is going to be Alvin the Treacherous, with an actual arc. So that's what makes Alvin, amazing from the get-go. The fact that he turns from a villain to a good guy after he learns the errors of his way, and he kind of learns that through Hiccup in a way, and his heroism and his defense of Burke. So him learning and evolving and doing that because of our main character's actions is just something really compelling and gives us some amazing themes to truly invest into throughout the entirety of Riders and Defenders of Burke. It's a very mature way to take the character through this theme of redemption, and just ultimately because you feel this change, you see the difference between when we first see him and when we finally see him. It just gives you a stronger connection to the character and makes you really want to root for him and his retribution through his actions, mind you. But next up is going to be Riker. I love this guy's introduction. He's introduced as an intelligent, brutal badass who can, of course, take down dragon riders with ease due to him having a strategic mind as well as a brute force body. And unfortunately, a lot of this intelligence and amazing chemistry with a character is lost as soon as Vigo is introduced, because they want to instead, kind of give Vigo those same traits. So naturally, if they make Riker the one-dimensional brute, so naturally his defeat is far less satisfying than it would have been otherwise because of a diminishing of his character in those later seasons. And worse yet, he's very cowardly in these seasons, so they completely wreck his character, and it's a shame that a character with such a perfect introduction went through just such a betrayal in his arc, or should I say, lack thereof once again. He doesn't grow as a character. In fact, if anything, he backwards develops due to the fact that he starts to put brawn over brains, which is completely against his introduction. So the inconsistencies is frustrating with this character, but since that introduction is so strong, and before Vigo is introduced, he's such a threatening, charismatic presence, and the voice actor was perfectly cast. It's deep and intimidating, so from the voice alone it induces fear within the audience. But outside of that, Riker is indeed one of the weaker How to Train Dragon villains, which is why he's here halfway through the list. But coming up next, we have Drago Bloodfist, a very underrated villain within the How to Train Your Dragon series, with whose main flaw even is the fact that he's not really introduced until halfway through the second movie. But that's not really much of a problem, because we feel a intimidating, powerful presence whenever he's merely talked about through Stoic, because we know Stoic as a fearless warrior. So him, at the near mention of Drago's name, swiveling up with fear and worry, properly establishes just how much of a force Drago is to be reckoned with, and how much we should fear this character. And because of that, the fear is sustained throughout the entire movie. And when they finally bring his motivations in, it all makes sense to invest you further into this character, since, dragons took a lot away from him as a boy, his village, his limbs. And so naturally that made him fear dragons growing up. And so he simply wants to take that fear of dragons and inflict it upon everyone else to conquer the world, as you could say, which is a generic motivation, that's for sure. But the way he goes about doing it, the fact that he wants to take advantage of people's fear of dragons the same manner in which he feared dragons as a boy, is pretty clever writing, I'm not going to lie. And so I like this villain more than most. I have a slight nostalgia towards him because he's from my favourite movie, or a slight bias, I should say, more so than nostalgia. And that's one of the main reasons why he's as high as he is. But with stronger motivations and an earlier introduction, I'm sure this villain could have been number one. But as he stands at the moment, he barely misses out on a medal, because for third place, the bronze medal goes to Dagger, with easily the best retribution arc of the entirety of any villain within the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. Alvin was merely an experiment, waiting for this character to expand upon those themes. Since Dagger is so energetic, his voice actor brings so much charisma and life to this character through his derangement. It gives him, personality and actual character to get behind. Sure, whilst you hate this little brat and want to see his throat slit constantly, wow, this got dark very, very quickly, you can't deny the entertainment you feel when watching this guy due to the powerful vocal performance and genuinely just how much energy and life the character has to him. His chemistry with Heather is fantastic, and the growth in their relationship is so compelling as it grows as a steady at a steady pace, even, which doesn't feel forceful in any manner whatsoever. And for conflict he creates amongst the Dragon Riders, even when he turns into a good guy, especially with between him and Fishlegs, as he's kind of taken Heather away from Fishlegs, and Fishlegs really cares about Heather. But naturally, Fishlegs soon learns that Heather deserves to be happy, and she's at her happiest with Dagger, so he lets her go, and he learns that through Dagger and their interactions with one another, so naturally they mend their relationship, and once again that grows at a steady, believable pace. So the fact that Dagger has such great relationship developments with all of the other characters, and a constant, compelling arc that's changing and adapting to surprise you and make you remember his character all the more, is so much fun to see. And once again, his retribution has emotion behind it, because when he sacrifices himself for the good of Heather and the rest of the Dragon Riders and leaves behind a note, of course, expressing his deepest, innermost emotions, and of course displaying to the audience that he had those emotions and that humanity to him, that he wasn't this vile, evil monster that we thought he was. It just made that sacrifice all the more upsetting, because he didn't need to go through that. He knew it was a trap, and yet he died due to the actions of other characters not believing him. And so you combine that with the music and the atmosphere built, it's so emotional, and then you bring him back and you're actually rooting for him. He's trying to save his dragon in that 4th season, and you want him to save that dragon because already the two had a fantastic bond, which Fishlegs pointed out, and we know from through Fishlegs, how great this bond has become because of Fishlegs and his knowledge between riders and dragons, so to say. So yeah, Dagger, amazing villain, and I truly cannot emphasize how great he is. And we've still got 2 more villains to go, because our second place spot even goes to Vigo Grimborn. I love this low angle shot presenting Vigo with a lot of power, because he most certainly has that. Whilst he doesn't have a brute body, he doesn't need to fight physically with a sword in order to be of brute force, because he has power and he abuses that. He has entire armies, and he treats it all like a game. A game of maces and talons, and he treats Wit Hiccup as a worthy adversary, and he's constantly adapting and evolving to Hiccup's strategy, and even taking technology of his which he admires, like his flame sword, his little cauldron, and using that to his advantage in order for him to get where he needs to be in terms of his power scale. So the natural respect he has for Hiccup, and his treatment of everything like it's a game of maces and talons, and his willingness to sacrifice anything in order to win, that's kind of emotionless, emotionlessness, if I can even say that word, that is, but that behind him is what makes him such a compelling, such a threatening, such an intimidating villain, because he can play Mason and Talons, he has the strategy, he has the numbers to sacrifice, he outsmarts Hiccup almost at every turn, so naturally, whenever he's bringing out one of his plans, his concoctions, we fear for our characters' lives for what Vigo might mercilessly bring out next, because our Dragon Riders, they don't have anything to sacrifice, so naturally, them losing their forces will create a much bigger blow to us emotionally than what it would to Vigo. And so naturally, it's just Vigo's interaction with Hiccup. Once again, his retribution and his redemption is so compelling, and you truly believe his change of heart when he notices the true vile evilness of Johan and Krogan as they portray him so mercilessly. It's compelling beyond belief, and that's why I'm kind of struggling to emphasize it, because it's just that good, and I love Vigo as a villain because of it. But moving on to number 1, without a shadow of a doubt, we have Grimmel. First of all, let's get my one weakness out of the way with this character, his design. He is too thin and not enough of a brutal force to become intimidating, but that's where his strategic mind comes in play. Just like Vigo, he treats everything like a game he dearly enjoys, and so because we know he takes such pleasure and pride in what he's doing, we are disgusted by him. And that somehow invests us in him even more because we have some sort of emotional attachment to him, even if that is discussed. And he creates a sharp contrast even to Hiccup, as rather than saving a Night Fury and letting it go, he kills it. And so he's acting as if he's motivated by society and ensuring that dragons for inferior species don't undo it all. But truly what he's motivated by is pride and glory. He scoffs and spits at Hiccup's ideals, and his lack of respect for him is what creates his ultimate downfall, unlike Vigo. But he's still the stronger villain because he creates a change within Hiccup's arc. He proves to Hiccup that there will always be threats like him, and the dragons will never be safe so long as they're around humans. So it's because of Grimmel that Hiccup decides to let the dragons go and be safe and at peace in their own hidden world. Just like I said with the Marvel video, preceding this one even, it's for villains that cause a change in our main heroes' perspectives, which are the most powerful villains emotionally, and the most investing ones at that. And Grimmel absolutely nails that. Not to mention the voice acting is phenomenal for this character. It brings so much life to this character, and he has such chemistry with Hiccup purely because he terrifies the ever-living bejeevers out of me with the fact that he cuts straight to the point. He doesn't monologue, he plans, he schemes, and it's all in the name of terror. I love it. So yes, Grimmel without doubt is the best How to Train Your Dragon villain, for reasons even beyond my own explanations right here, and that's where we're going to be leaving off the video. So I will see you guys tomorrow for another element of this villain week, and until the moment arises, peace, and thank you so much as always for watching.